You know, I've been thinking about what you said the other day, and I actually have a few thoughts on it. We need to make sure we have all the supplies before we head out. The most important thing is having that understanding of the target audience and what they really want.
There are a number of reasons why I am the most qualified candidate.
It's a pleasure doing business with you, as I say. Likewise, looking forward to a successful collaboration. So, what do you think about the progress so far?
Yeah, it's looking good, definitely on schedule.
It's like a symphony in your mouth, you know? Every flavor just works so well together.
The orchard seemed to breathe with a quiet rhythm that morning, its branches heavy with ripening fruit, each leaf whispering secrets to the wind. Diep moved carefully between the trees, her hands brushing against the smooth skin of persimmons that glowed like lanterns in the pale light. Beside her, little Nee skipped along with the unsteady but determined energy of a child, her laughter spilling into the air like a melody that the orchard itself seemed to echo. Diep's basket grew heavy, the weight of the fruit pulling at her arm. Yet it wasn't the burden she noticed, but the promise it carried. Food to ripen at home, to sell later at the market, a small thread weaving survival into their fragile days. Nee reached up with both hands, wobbling as she tried to pluck a fruit just out of reach, and Diep steadied her, her voice soft but firm, reminding the girl that some things needed patience before they could be grasped. When they had filled their baskets, they paused on the worn path leading home. The stream beside them rushed louder than usual, swollen by days of rain, its waters frothing and restless as though it carried its own hidden sorrow. Diep tightened her grip on Nee's hand, guiding her across the slippery stones, her mind already calculating how long it would take for the persimmons to ripen, how much she might earn, how many days of safety and food it could buy. The world felt both immense and unbearably small, narrowed to the beating of her heart and the little hand curled inside her own. She whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep, that life would grow kinder, that the storm that had shadowed them for years would finally pass. Back at the family home, the walls seemed to lean closer, tired with age but still holding the echoes of generations. James stepped through the doorway, his presence a sudden brightness that shifted the air. His mother looked up from her chair, her face alight with a joy that carved deeper lines around her eyes. She reached for him with trembling hands, her voice breaking with relief at his return. The table between them bore a small gift from a neighbor, bananas, their skin mottled with spots of sweetness. She peeled one and pressed it into his hand, as though feeding him were proof he had truly come back. James smiled, but beneath the curve of his lips, there was the weight of battles fought in silence, of distance endured not just in miles, but in time and sacrifice. They sat together, the fruit dissolving on their tongues, and for a moment the simplicity of the act felt sacred. James asked about her health, about the work that had consumed her in his absence, and she brushed away her fatigue with a gesture, insisting she was fine. Yet her eyes lingered on him, searching for reassurance that he was not just present in body, but whole in spirit. He spoke of plans stirring in his mind, of a trip he longed to take, a camping journey timed for the 2nd of September, a way to reclaim the days stolen by his absence. He wanted her there, wanted Diep there, wanted Nie's laughter to rise beneath the trees as a hymn to the life they were building. His mother hesitated, the weight of obligations pulling at her, yet she told him to go, to gather the little family he cherished and give them the moments she no longer had the strength to claim for herself. It was then she shifted the conversation, her voice soft but threaded with a gravity that made James still. She spoke of marriage, of Diep, of the way the woman had stitched herself into his life with quiet resilience. She admitted that she and his father had discussed it, that the subject had lingered between them like an unspoken command. James lowered his eyes, the memory of his first proposal rising like a wound, still tender. He confessed that he had asked before, that deep silence had been an answer of its own, that readiness could not be forced. Yet he admitted, too, that his heart remained restless, that the camping trip was not just an escape, but a chance to try again, to place his soul in her hands once more. His mother listened, nodding slowly, and though her expression held approval, it also carried a flicker of unease. James's voice wavered when he spoke of Nye. The girl was not his by blood, abandoned by the ones who should have cherished her, but she had become as much a part of him as the breath in his chest. He wanted to make her his daughter in truth, not just in affection. He wanted to erase the shadow of rejection that trailed her and replace it with the permanence of belonging. His mother's fingers tightened around her cup, the tea trembling slightly as she considered the weight of his words. She feared her husband's judgment, the stern disapproval that had first greeted James's bond with Diep, the reminder that she had been married once before, a fact that seemed to him like an unshakable stain. But she promised her son she would speak to his father, that she would fight for this fragile dream he cradled in his hands. Diep, meanwhile, tended to the quiet rhythms of life, her hands never idle, her thoughts tethered to both the present and the uncertain horizon. She knew the scars of her past still lingered, knew that love was never free of shadows. But James's presence had lit corners of her heart she thought would remain cold forever. She feared the weight of his hopes, feared the day his world and hers might collide in a way that shattered the delicate peace they had built. Yet she also longed for the solidity of his promises, for the strength of his arms around her when the nights grew long and doubts crept in like thieves. The orchard's fruit ripened slowly, but within the home, the air was thick with urgency. James began gathering supplies, planning routes, speaking with the ease of a man who believed that action could carve certainty from chaos. His mother watched him, torn between pride and worry, knowing that the path he chose was not hers to control. She remembered his boyhood, the reckless gleam in his eyes, the way he had always run headlong into the future, unafraid of the wounds he might gather. Now she saw the same fire, tempered by love but still dangerous in its intensity. On the eve of their journey, the house seemed to hum with anticipation. Nie folded her small clothes with care, her excitement bubbling over as she asked question after question about the forest, the tent, the stars. Diep prepared food, her motion steady but her mind restless, rehearsing conversations she might never have, imagining answers she wasn't sure she could give. James moved among them like a current of energy, unstoppable, buoyed by visions of a fire crackling beneath the night sky. of vows whispered not in the grandeur of ceremony, but in the intimacy of shared struggle. As darkness fell, James stood alone in the yard, the air cool against his skin. He looked up at the sky, the stars faint behind drifting clouds, and whispered a vow to the silence. He promised that this time would be different, that he would not let fear or hesitation unravel what they had fought to build. The night held its breath with him, as though the world itself leaned closer to listen. Inside, his mother lingered at the doorway, her eyes tracing his silhouette. She felt the tide of change approaching, inexorable as the dawn. She prayed silently that love would be enough to carry them through the storms ahead, that her son would not break beneath the weight of expectations or the fragility of dreams. And in that house, with its worn walls and its fragile hopes, 3 lives prepared to weave themselves tighter into the fabric of family. The fruit in the baskets would ripen, the stream would rise and fall, and the world would keep turning. But for James, Diep, and little Nye, the days ahead would hold the kind of moments that carved eternity into memory. The morning sun stretched long fingers across the fields as James guided the car down a winding road that led away from the town and into the untamed embrace of the countryside. Diep sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the horizon where the trees gathered like watchful guardians. In the back seat, little Nee pressed her face to the glass, her breath fogging the window as she pointed excitedly at cows grazing, rivers glinting, and distant hills that seemed to whisper secrets only children could hear. The vehicle hummed like a steady heartbeat beneath them, carrying not just supplies but also the unspoken hopes and fears of 3 lives poised at the edge of change. When they arrived at the campsite, the air felt alive, crisp and tinged with pine. The earth beneath their feet smelled damp and wild, as though it had been waiting centuries for them to arrive. James set down the heavy bags with a grunt, sweat beading on his forehead, but his grin never faltered. Diep looked around, her gaze sweeping across the clearing that opened to a canopy of sky. It wasn't luxury, but it was freedom, a small piece of untouched world where time seemed to pause. Nee tugged at her sleeve, demanding to help, and together they began unpacking, each item pulled from the bag a puzzle piece in the fragile picture of home they were trying to assemble under the open sky. The tent proved more stubborn than expected, its fabric twisting in the wind like a living creature unwilling to be tamed. James wrestled with the poles, muttering under his breath, while Diep held one side steady, her laughter spilling out in bursts that only made him more determined. Nye darted around them like a sparrow, picking up stakes, dropping them again, then clapping when a corner finally held. At last, the tent rose, crooked, imperfect, but undeniably theirs. They stood back to admire it, breathless and laughing, as if they had just conquered a mountain rather than a bundle of canvas and rope. As the afternoon faded, hunger crept in like a sly visitor. They inventoried their supplies and found only bread, instant noodles, and a scattering of fruit. Diep's brow furrowed, but James waved away her concern, insisting that simplicity was part of the adventure. He gathered twigs and branches, coaxing a flame to life with the patience of a man who believed fire was more than heat. It was a promise. The fire crackled to life, its light licking the dusk, painting their faces in shades of gold and shadow. Diep leaned close, her fingers brushing against his as they set the pot over the flames, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to shrink to just that touch. The noodles bubbled, steam curling into the air with the fragrance of comfort. They sat together, sharing from the same bowl, the act of passing chopsticks between them more intimate than any grand gesture. Nee slurped loudly, sauce staining her lips, and they laughed until their sides ached. The bread was torn into uneven pieces, handed out like treasure, and the fruit, though meager, tasted like a feast. In that circle of firelight, scarcity transformed into abundance, not in measure, but in meaning. Every bite was heavy with gratitude, every swallow rich with the sweetness of being together. Night deepened, wrapping them in its velvet cloak. The stars pierced through the dark, each one a silent witness to their gathering. James leaned back, his arm brushing against Diep's, and told stories of his childhood, of climbing trees too tall and falling harder than he should have, of dreams that once seemed impossible, but now felt close enough to touch. Diep listened, her eyes reflecting the firelight, her smile soft, the weight of her past briefly lifted by his words. Nee drifted between them, her head eventually finding a pillow on Diep's lap, her breathing evening into the rhythm of sleep. The forest sang its chorus of crickets and rustling leaves, but within the tent of firelight, a hush settled. James lowered his voice, speaking not of past adventures, but of the fragile present. He asked Diep how she had endured these last 6 months with him. 6 months of uncertain futures, of tentative steps toward love. Her answer was simple, yet profound. She had found happiness in him, in the way his presence steadied her, in the way he looked at her, as if she were not defined by scars, but by strength. Her words melted into the night, yet they lingered inside him like embers refusing to fade. He reached for her hand, his fingers hesitant, almost reverent. He called her beautiful, not in the shallow sense the world often tossed about, but in a way that carried weight. Beautiful, because she had survived, because she had cared for Nee, because she had stood when life had tried to break her. His voice trembled, carrying the raw truth that she was the first to make his heart feel both fragile and invincible at once. Diep turned her gaze away, overwhelmed, but her hand tightened in his. Betraying the words, her lips could not yet speak. James spoke of change, of how their closeness no longer felt forced, how every glance and every touch had become natural, effortless, necessary. He spoke of building something lasting, of carving a life together not from luxury, but from loyalty. Diep listened, her heart pounding, torn between the safety of hesitation and the allure of surrender. The fire popped, scattering sparks into the sky, as if urging her to decide, to leap, to believe. The night stretched long, the weight of unspoken promises pressing on them both. James hesitated, the words poised on his tongue, heavy with the gravity of what they meant. He had failed once before, had asked and been met with silence, but tonight felt different. Tonight, beneath the witness of stars and the fragile tent they had raised, he wanted to ask again. He wanted to tether his future to hers, not with demands, but with devotion. Diep, sensing the storm within him, pulled Nee closer, as if shielding herself behind the innocence of the child's slumber. She whispered that the night was beautiful, that the fire was warm, that they should rest. But her eyes betrayed her turmoil. A flicker of fear mingled with longing. She knew what he wanted, knew what he was building toward, and she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. James fell silent, swallowing the question that burned on his tongue. He lay back on the ground, staring at the sky, and wondered how many stars it would take to carry his unspoken vow to the heavens. Diep shifted beside him, her presence both a comfort and a torment. The night wrapped them close, but between them stretched a chasm of uncertainty that no fire could banish. When sleep finally claimed them, the fire had dwindled to embers, but its warmth lingered. The tent stood crooked but proud. The fruit sat waiting for tomorrow, and in the fragile space between heartbeats, 3 lives lay bound together by threads invisible, yet unbreakable. The forest, eternal and patient, whispered above them, knowing that what came next would change everything. The dawn crept slowly over the campsite, painting the canvas of the sky in strokes of pink and gold. The forest seemed to awaken with them, birds lifting their voices in a chorus that carried through the still air. James stirred first, rising from the hard earth with a groan, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. He looked down at Diep, who was curled protectively around Nye, her hair tangled and her face softened by sleep. For a moment, he simply watched, the sight filling him with a tenderness so sharp it ached. He wanted this image to be his forever, the fragile peace of family, the quiet strength of love found against all odds. Diep woke with the sun warming her cheek, blinking as she adjusted to the brightness. She noticed James tending to the fire, coaxing it back to life with practiced care, and felt her chest tighten with unspoken gratitude. The smell of boiling water rose, mingling with the damp scent of earth, and soon James was handing her a steaming cup of tea, his eyes meeting hers with a smile that carried too much meaning for so small a gesture. She whispered thanks, her fingers brushing his, and for a moment the world seemed perfectly balanced, fragile, but whole. Nee awoke with a burst of energy, tumbling from the tent with hair sticking in every direction. She demanded bread, then fruit, then simply ran circles around them, laughter ringing like bells through the trees. James chased her briefly, scooping her up and spinning until her giggles dissolved into gasps for breath. Diep watched, her heart caught between joy and fear, knowing how easily such moments could slip away. She wondered if happiness always came with a shadow, if the more brightly it burned, the more likely it was to be extinguished. Breakfast was meager, but shared like a feast. They tore bread into small pieces, passed fruit between them, drank the last of the tea. James kept stealing glances at Diep, each one weighted with the words he had swallowed the night before. The fire in him refused to dim, and as the morning grew brighter, so did his determination. He told himself he could not leave this place without speaking, without asking again, even if the answer shattered him. His chest thrummed with anticipation, his palms damp as though preparing for battle rather than love. When Nee wandered off to gather wildflowers, James seized the moment. He drew closer to Diep, his voice low but firm, as if afraid the forest itself might eavesdrop. He spoke of their journey, of the months that had changed him, of the way she had become not just a companion, but the axis around which his world turned. His eyes burned as he confessed that every laugh, every silence, every shared struggle had only deepened his certainty. He could not imagine a life without her. The words tumbled out raw, unpolished, but alive with sincerity. He wanted her as his wife, as his partner, as the mother not only to Nye, but to the life they had yet to build together. Diep froze, her breath catching like a trapped bird. The world tilted, the morning light too bright, the air too thin. She remembered his earlier proposal, the fear that had clawed at her then, and felt it return now with renewed force. Her heart wanted to leap, to accept, to fall into the safety of his arms, but her mind screamed of caution. She thought of the scars she carried, the weight of past mistakes, the whispers of judgment that still clung to her name. Could she truly begin again? Could she risk dragging him into the storms that still haunted her? James saw the flicker of hesitation, the shadow that crossed her face, and it pierced him like a blade. But instead of retreating, he reached for her hand, holding it gently yet firmly. He told her he understood the fear, that love was not about erasing scars, but carrying them together. His voice cracked as he promised he was not asking for perfection, only for the chance to walk beside her, to face the storms as one. His words were not polished vows, but desperate truth, heavy with the weight of his soul. Tears gathered in Diep's eyes, blurring the world. She tried to speak but faltered, the dam of emotion threatening to break. She whispered that she was afraid, that promises had betrayed her before, that hope had been a cruel trick too many times. James pressed her hand to his chest, letting her feel the frantic beat of his heart, insisting that this was no illusion. His life was hers if she wanted it, fragile but real. The silence between them stretched, filled with the sound of birds, the crackle of fire, the distant laughter of Nee weaving crowns of wildflowers. At last, Nee came bounding back, her small hands clutching flowers woven into a crooked halo. She placed it on Diep's head, declaring with childish certainty that she looked like a queen. The innocence of the act cracked something inside Diep, scattering her defenses like brittle glass. She gathered Nye into her arms, holding her tightly, and when she looked back at James, her eyes no longer ran from his. She did not speak the word he longed for, not yet, but she gave him something else: hope. A trembling smile, a nod, the silent agreement that she was willing to try. James exhaled as if he had been drowning and finally reached air. He pulled them both close, his arms encircling mother and child, the fragile crown of flowers pressed between them. The forest seemed to sigh in relief, leaves rustling like applause. For now, it was enough. Not a binding vow, not a final answer, but the promise of possibility. The beginning of something neither of them could yet name, but both desperately wanted to believe in. As the day wore on, they packed their things, the tent collapsing into a bundle of fabric, the fire smothered to ash. The path home awaited, uncertain and long, but the air between them felt lighter, as though they had shed a burden. Diep walked beside James, her hand brushing his, not yet clasping, but no longer pulling away. Nye skipped ahead, her flower crown askew, her laughter leading them forward. The world remained vast and unforgiving, filled with challenges yet to come. But beneath the canopy of trees and the endless sky, they had taken a step into a new chapter. Love had not solved everything, but it had given them a compass. And as they left the campsite behind, the echoes of their laughter, their tears, and their unspoken vows lingered in the forest, carried by the wind like a song that promised they were not alone.